Before I can seam weld the engine bay and paint it, I need to remove a few more bits and pieces. I'd left the running gear in the car so it could be pushed in and out of the garage. This is actually the furthest in I've been with a Kadett. I've never actually taken off the steering rack before. So this is just a big knuckle on the inside of the bulkhead. Took that off, and then I have had these ends off, of course, to do the gaiters from time to time, but never taken them all off and then taken out the rack. The steering rack has a little damper across the top. I don't think I've seen that on the right-hand drive versions. Got tired of leaning over the wings and crawled into the engine bay. With the engine and gearbox out, you can get this unique perspective.
It's almost inevitable that you'll find yourself in here at some point on a decent project.
Back out of my playpen there for the last few turns so I can carry the rack away. It'll be great having all these parts out and not having to mask them up and work around them. We'll get a really decent coat of paint on all of the body this way. Just below the rack you can see the holes for the anti-roll bar, but it was missing when I got this car, and I do want to fit one, and maybe I'll disconnect it, and I just want to understand the difference it makes. I'm using a tie wrap to keep all the nuts together with the rack so that they're easy to find when it comes to reassembly. Now this is the gear selector. You can see the temporary bolts I have in the holes for the seat mountings protruding there on the top left. They won't be staying there, and the ones I fit won't be coming in that far. Someone at some stage has done a great job under sealing this car, which is why it's still in such good condition. I will be removing that and just relying on paint in most areas to save a bit of weight and have a little bit less combustible material underneath. The gear selector normally shares this space with the exhaust. I'll keep the original nuts together with this as well. Right, try climbing into the engine bay this time. And I'm going to take off that rear. It's really a gearbox mounting, but it supports the engine and gearbox. I'm cleaning off all the threads on everything I'm using because I will be reusing the original bolts. I'm just using a bit of lubricant on them to assist them so I don't damage the threads. Eric is quite clean, but these are places that could gather quite a bit of muck in regular use. Another bolt at the back. There's a exhaust support at the back of this bracket there as well. That's the rusty bit. But these should all still clean up really well. I don't think the rust has gone too far. It's time though. I wouldn't like to leave these things on much longer. This is the right hand engine mounting. Thinking up ideas of how I might spring a support off this for a sump guard, going down off perhaps this bolt here and the one on the front. That'll be another important job to do when the engine is in. I suppose in an ideal world I would have done it before the engine came out, but I think if you waited for the absolutely perfect timeline, the project would never get done at all. I should be able to fit things up and weld away from the freshly painted engine bay though. Might take a little bit more measuring, and that'll be an extra reason for seam welding along that particular seam you see is just behind that engine mounting, because you will then be transferring shock from the ground up into the shell, protecting the engine. Might think about some sort of rubber bush actually, perhaps between the the supports and the actual protective plate, so that we're not shifting pure shock waves from the ground up through every nut and bolt in the car. This is the left hand side mounting, and again I'll think of some sort of support that can go down from here, I think, for my sump card. Remove the brake hoses and the last two lines in the engine bay. I think I'm allowed to change the rubber hoses to braided ones under the historic regulations. Take off the clip that holds it. There we go. And these are the last two pipes that were coming up to the master cylinder. That's the longer one. Going to the right hand side. You can see me taking off the clip a bit better this time. The vice grip. Managed to get new ones of those clips when I was doing the charade. Maybe I can get them again for the Kadett. Now, a few grommets and bits and pieces to remove. They're from the radiator supports. That's the earth strap bolt from the engine, and that's the one that goes to the battery. And I'll take off the bonnet strut. Now, the lower wishbones. This big bolt and nut can be troublesome. They fuse into the rubber bushing. I don't really recommend using the gun where a nut has to be held with a spanner, but in this case it's so well supported by the wishbone, I made a personal judgment call, and it didn't turn anyway. Going to have to do this manually. So I've got a socket, and then I have a big bar that I bought when I had a Transit, which was quite frequently used on the Talbot Express as well. It would of course be easier to get a nut off first, but there's so little space in there. Can't get this big extension bar in there. Ending up making some weird extension to the spanner, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to use a bit of brute force, just changing the socket position or a bit of leverage. There it goes. Now I can do the rest with the gun. Smoking.
Make a wish.
That's a lot of components out of the way and a lot of parts to clean.